Jake Morrison gripped the controls of his small ship as it shook like a leaf in a storm. Red lights flashed all around him in the tiny cockpit. The computer kept making loud beeping sounds that hurt his ears. Outside the window, he could see chunks of rock flying past his ship like angry bullets. Come on, Jake said through his teeth. He was trying to steer away from the meteor storm, but his ship was not listening to him anymore. Something had hit the navigation system, and now he was flying blind through space. Jake was 28 years old and had been flying ships for the Earth Space Force for 6 years. He had seen many dangerous things in space, but this meteor storm was the worst he had ever faced. His job was to explore new planets and check if they were safe for humans to visit. It was usually a quiet job, but not today. A big chunk of rock hit the side of his ship. The whole vessel spun around 3 times before Jake could get control back. When he looked at his instruments, his heart sank. The engine was damaged. The radio was broken. Even worse, he was being pulled down toward a planet below. The planet looked like a giant blue and green marble. Jake had never seen it before, and it was not on his star maps. He tried to start the emergency rockets, but they only worked for a few seconds before dying out. His ship was falling toward the planet, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Jake strapped himself in tight and prepared for a crash landing. He had done this before in training, but never for real. The ship entered the planet's atmosphere, and everything outside the window turned bright orange from the heat. The ship shook so hard that Jake's teeth hurt. He aimed for what looked like a flat area near some mountains. Trees rushed past the window as the ship came down fast. Jake pulled back on the controls as hard as he could. The ship hit the ground once, bounced up, hit again, and then slid across the dirt for what felt like forever, before finally stopping. For a moment, everything was quiet. Jake could hear his own heart beating. Smoke was coming from somewhere in the ship, but he was alive. He unbuckled his straps and checked himself for injuries. His left arm hurt, and he had a cut on his forehead, but nothing was broken. Jake grabbed his emergency pack and climbed out of the ship. The air outside was thin but breathable. He was in a valley surrounded by tall purple mountains. The trees around him had silver leaves that made a soft ringing sound in the wind. 2 suns hung in the orange sky, and Jake realized he was very far from home. He walked around his ship to see how bad the damage was. The engine was completely broken. The radio antenna was bent and twisted. Even if he could fix the radio, his emergency beacon was crushed. No one would be able to find him here. Jake set up his emergency camp near the ship as the suns began to set. He had food for about 10 days and water for a week. His environmental suit could keep him warm, but it was already showing damage from the crash. He hoped someone would come looking for him soon. The temperature began to drop fast as darkness came. Jake had never felt cold like this before. It was the kind of cold that went right through his bones. His damaged suit was not working well, and he could feel the heat leaking out. He found a small cave in the rocks nearby and decided to sleep there. It would protect him from the wind at least. Jake spread out his emergency thermal blanket, the silver kind that reflected body heat back to keep a person warm. It was the only thing standing between him and freezing to death on this strange world. As he lay in the cave, Jake looked up at the alien stars and wondered if he would ever see Earth again. The cold was getting worse, and he pulled the blanket tight around himself. He had to stay alive long enough for a rescue team to find him, but he did not know how long that would take. The night sounds of the alien world were strange and beautiful. Something that sounded like singing came from the mountains. Other creatures made soft clicking noises in the distance. Jake was scared, but also amazed by this new world. He was just starting to fall asleep when he heard a different sound. It was weak and sad, like someone crying. Jake sat up and listened carefully. The sound was coming from outside his cave, somewhere in the darkness. Jake grabbed his flashlight and crawled to the mouth of the cave. He pointed the light out into the night and saw something that made his heart race. About 20 feet away, a small figure was lying on the ground. It looked like a child, but the skin seemed to glow with a faint blue light. The figure was not moving much, and Jake could see it was shivering in the cold. Without thinking about the danger, he crawled out of his cave and moved closer. It was definitely a child, but not human. The skin looked like it was made of crystal, and the hair was white as snow. The alien child was unconscious and very cold. Jake could see that it was dying from the freezing temperature. He looked back at his warm cave and his precious thermal blanket. If he shared his heat with this alien child, he might not survive the night himself. But if he did nothing, the child would certainly die. Jake made his choice. He carefully picked up the small alien and carried it back to his cave. Without hesitation, he wrapped his thermal blanket around both of them and held the child close, sharing his body heat through the long, cold night ahead. Jake woke up when the first sun began to rise over the purple mountains. His whole body was stiff and cold, but he was alive. The alien child in his arms was breathing slowly and steadily. Her crystal skin was starting to glow with a soft blue light again, which Jake hoped was a good sign. The child's eyes opened, and Jake found himself looking into the most beautiful eyes he had ever seen. They were like looking into deep water with lights dancing underneath. The child said something in a musical language that Jake did not understand, but her voice was weak and tired. Jake smiled at her and spoke softly. "It's okay. You're safe now." He did not think she could understand his words, but he hoped his voice would sound friendly and calm. The child tried to sit up, but she was still too weak. Jake helped her drink some water from his emergency bottle. She looked around the cave with wonder, as if she had never seen anything like it before. Then she looked at Jake's thermal blanket that was still wrapped around both of them. Suddenly, the child's eyes went wide, and she started speaking rapidly in her musical language. She pointed at the blanket and then at Jake, and her voice sounded excited and grateful. Jake did not understand the words, but he could tell she was trying to thank him. The sound of voices echoing across the valley made them both freeze. The child grabbed Jake's arm and listened carefully. She said something that sounded urgent and pointed toward the mouth of the cave. Jake crawled to the entrance and looked out. In the distance, he could see a group of figures moving across the valley toward them. They were tall and moved in a strange, graceful way that was definitely not human. Some of them were carrying what looked like weapons. The child tried to stand up, but her legs were still too weak. She called out in her musical language, and her voice echoed across the valley. The figures in the distance stopped moving and then started running toward the cave. Jake's heart began to beat fast. He did not know if these aliens were friendly or dangerous. He helped the child sit up and wrapped the thermal blanket around her shoulders. If these were her people, maybe they would be grateful that he had saved her. But if they thought he had hurt her, he might be in serious trouble. The first alien to reach the cave was huge, almost 7 feet tall, with crystal skin that shone like diamonds in the morning light. Behind him came others, all tall and beautiful in an otherworldly way. Their eyes glowed with an inner light, and they moved like dancers even when they were running. The big alien stopped at the mouth of the cave and stared at Jake with suspicious eyes. He said something in a deep, commanding voice that did not sound friendly at all. The other aliens spread out around the cave entrance, and Jake could see they were definitely carrying weapons. The child spoke up from behind Jake. Her voice was stronger now, and she talked quickly in her musical language. She pointed at Jake and then at the thermal blanket, and Jake could hear gratitude in her voice even though he did not understand the words. But the big alien did not look convinced. He stepped into the cave and grabbed Jake by the arm, pulling him to his feet. Jake did not resist, but he kept his hands where the aliens could see them. He did not want them to think he was dangerous. More aliens arrived at the cave. One of them, a tall female with intricate patterns carved into her crystal skin, rushed past the others and knelt beside the child. She spoke in worried tones and checked the child for injuries. Jake could tell this must be the child's mother or someone who cared about her very much. The child grabbed her caregiver's arm and pointed at Jake. She spoke urgently, gesturing at the thermal blanket and then hugging it to herself. The adult alien listened carefully, and slowly her expression began to change from worry to surprise. She stood up and walked over to Jake. She studied his face for a long moment, then looked at the thermal blanket, then back at Jake. She said something to the big alien who was still holding Jake's arm. The big alien's expression changed too, from suspicion to confusion. The child struggled to her feet with help from the female alien. She walked unsteadily over to Jake and took his hand in both of hers. Her skin felt cool and smooth like polished stone. She looked up at him with those amazing eyes and said something that sounded like a blessing or a prayer. All the aliens in the cave became very quiet. They stared at Jake with expressions he could not read. The big alien slowly let go of Jake's arm and stepped back. He said something that sounded like a question, and the child answered him with a long speech pointing at Jake and the blanket again and again. Jake wished desperately that he could understand what they were saying. The aliens seemed to be having an important discussion about him, and he had no idea if it was good or bad. All he could do was stand there and hope that saving the child's life would count for something. One of the aliens produced a small device that looked like a crystal tablet. He spoke into it, and Jake was amazed to hear words coming out in English, though with a strange accent. "Human," the device said in a mechanical voice. "You shared warmth with child in cold night." "This is truth?" Jake looked at the child, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes," he said carefully. "She was very cold. I thought she might die, so I shared my blanket and my body heat to keep her warm." The alien spoke into the device again, and it translated his words. "You risked your own life for child of strangers? You asked for nothing in return?" "I couldn't just let her freeze to death," Jake said. "She's just a child. Anyone would have done the same thing." When the device translated his words, all the aliens became very excited. They talked rapidly among themselves, and Jake could hear amazement in their voices. The big alien, who Jake was starting to think might be the child's father, looked at him with an expression that had completely changed from suspicion to something like awe. The female alien came forward and spoke into the translation device. "You will come with us to our city. You are honored guest now, not prisoner. You have done something very special, though you do not understand what it means to our people." Jake looked around at all the crystal-skinned faces staring at him with respect and wonder. He had no idea what he had stumbled into, but it seemed that his simple act of kindness had somehow made him important to these alien people. All he had done was share his blanket with a cold child, but apparently that meant much more to them than he could possibly imagine. The alien city was like nothing Jake had ever seen in his life. The buildings looked like they were grown from crystal rather than built from stone or metal. They rose up from the ground in spiraling towers that caught the light from the two suns and threw rainbows everywhere. The streets were made of smooth white stone that seemed to glow softly in the shadows. Jake rode in a floating vehicle with the child and her family. The child's name was Narration, and she had been getting stronger ever since they left the cave. The big alien who Jake had thought might be her father was actually her father. His name was Kethmiran, and Jake learned that he was an important leader in the city. Kethmiran's wife was named Velnara, and she was the one who had been so worried about Narration. She kept looking at Jake with grateful eyes and saying things in their musical language that the translation device told him were thanks and blessings. As they traveled through the city, Jake noticed that other aliens stopped what they were doing to stare at him. Word seemed to be spreading quickly about the human who had saved Narration. Some of the aliens bowed as their vehicle passed, which made Jake feel very uncomfortable. He was not used to being treated like someone important. They arrived at a huge crystal palace that rose up into the clouds. Jake's room was bigger than his entire apartment back on Earth. The walls were made of clear crystal, and he could see the whole city spread out below him. Servants brought him food and clothes, and everything was beautiful beyond description. But Jake was confused. He kept asking Kethmiran why everyone was treating him like a hero, when all he had done was help a child who was in trouble. Through the translation device, Kethmiran told him that he would understand soon when the other humans arrived. 3 days later, a rescue ship from Earth landed in the Crystal City. Jake was so happy to see other humans that he almost cried. The rescue team was led by Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a scientist who studied alien cultures. She had been sent specifically to figure out what had happened and why the aliens were treating Jake like royalty. Elena was a small woman with kind eyes and a quick smile. She spoke several alien languages and had been working with different species for many years. When she saw how the crystal people treated Jake, she was amazed. "Jake," she said as they sat in his crystal room, "do you have any idea what you've stumbled into here?" "Not really," Jake admitted. "I just helped a kid who was freezing. I don't understand why everyone acts like I did something amazing." Elena smiled and pulled out her computer tablet. "Let me explain something about these people. They're called the Zelthari, and they have a very old and very important tradition." She showed Jake pictures and documents on her tablet as she talked. The Zelthari believe that the highest form of honor is something they call Sharvathul. It means saving someone's life by risking your own life, especially when you don't know the person and don't expect anything in return. Jake listened carefully as Elena continued. In their entire history, which goes back thousands of years, there have only been a few dozen people who have ever performed Sharvathul. They remember every single one, and those people are considered the greatest heroes in their culture. But I'm not even one of their people, Jake said. I'm just a human. That makes it even more special to them, Elena explained. You saved a Zelthari child even though she was a complete stranger from a different species. You shared your only source of warmth, which could have killed you in those freezing temperatures, and you did it without thinking about reward or recognition. Jake started to understand why everyone had been staring at him. So they think I'm some kind of hero? More than that, Elena said. They think you're proof that humans have good hearts. The Zelthari have always been suspicious of other species, especially humans. They thought we were greedy and violent. But what you did shows them that humans can be just as capable of selfless love as any Zelthari. Over the next few days, Elena helped Jake learn more about Zelthari culture. She explained that Narration was not just any child, but the daughter of one of the most powerful families on the planet. Her father, Kethmiran, was a member of the ruling council that made decisions for their whole world. The fact that you saved her specifically is incredibly significant, Elena told him. But even if she had been a poor child with no family, what you did would still be considered sacred to these people. Jake met with Kethmiran and his family every day. Through Elena's translations, he learned about their customs and their history. He found out that Lyrishen had been on a traditional trial called the Walk of Growing, where young Zelthari had to survive alone in the wilderness for 3 days to prove they were ready to become adults. She got lost in a storm and wandered for 2 days before collapsing, near your crash site, Kethmiran explained. If you had not found her, she would have died before morning. You gave her your warmth when you needed it to survive. This is the purest form of Sharvathul. Lyrishen herself had become Jake's biggest supporter in the city. Even though she was young, she was very smart and had learned some English words to talk with him directly. She followed him around the palace and told everyone she met about how the kind human had saved her life. You are my Sharvathul brother now, she told Jake one day as they walked through the crystal gardens. That means you are part of our family forever. When I grow up, I want to learn about your people so I can help humans and Zelthari become friends. Elena explained that this was a big deal. The Zelthari have never had good relationships with other species. They've always kept to themselves and avoided contact with the galactic community. But because of what you did, they're starting to see that friendship with other species might be possible. Jake was starting to realize that his simple act of kindness had created something much bigger than he had ever imagined. Word about the human hero was spreading beyond just the Crystal City. Other Zelthari settlements across the planet were hearing the story, and they were all amazed that an alien had performed their most sacred act of heroism. I just shared my blanket, Jake said to Elena one evening as they watched the 2 suns set over the Crystal City. I don't understand how something so simple could change so much. Elena smiled at him. Sometimes the simplest acts are the most powerful ones. You showed these people that kindness doesn't depend on language or culture or even species. Kindness is something that all good hearts understand, no matter where they come from. As Jake looked out over the beautiful alien city, he began to understand that his crashed ship and his cold night in the cave had led to something amazing. He had not just saved one child's life. He had opened a door between 2 species that might lead to friendship and understanding for generations to come. News about Jake Morrison spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Elena Rodriguez had sent her report to Earth Command, but she had also shared the story with her contacts in the Galactic Council. Within days, every major species in known space was talking about the human who had performed Sharvathul. The Galactic Council was a huge organization where representatives from hundreds of different worlds met to discuss trade, peace, and problems between species. The council met on a space station that floated between several star systems, and it was considered the most important place in the galaxy for diplomacy. Ambassador Threndarak was the Zelthari representative to the Galactic Council. He was an old and respected leader who had served his people for many years. When he received the report about Jake's actions, he did something that shocked everyone who knew him. For the first time in Zelthari history, Ambassador Threndarak requested a special session of the Council to nominate an alien for the Cross-Species Honor of Merit. This was an award that was almost never given, and no human had ever received it before. The request caused chaos in the council chambers. Representatives from dozens of worlds wanted to know more about this human hero. Some were suspicious, thinking it might be some kind of trick. Others were curious about what could have impressed the usually distant Zelthari so much. Back on Earth, Captain Lisa Adams received an urgent message from Galactic Command. She was one of Earth's best diplomats, a woman who had spent her career building relationships with alien species. She had short brown hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. When she read the report about Jake Morrison, she could hardly believe it. One pilot with a blanket has done more for human-alien relations than all our diplomats combined, she said to her assistant as she packed for the trip to Zelthara. Captain Adams arrived at the Crystal City with a small team of advisors and scientists. She wanted to understand exactly what had happened and what it meant for humanity's future in the galaxy. When she met Jake, she was surprised to find a simple, modest man who seemed embarrassed by all the attention. "Sir," she said to Jake, though he was only a lieutenant and she outranked him, "do you understand that your actions have changed how the entire galaxy sees humanity?" Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. They were sitting in the Crystal Palace's great hall, surrounded by beautiful Zeltari art and furniture. "I keep hearing that, but I still don't really understand how sharing a blanket could be so important." Elena Rodriguez, who had become Jake's unofficial translator and cultural guide, helped explain the bigger picture. Jake, the Zelthari are one of the most respected species in the galaxy. They're known for their wisdom and their high moral standards. When they honor someone, other species pay attention. Captain Adams nodded and pulled out her tablet to show Jake news reports from across the galaxy. "Look at these headlines. Human shows true heroism on Zelthara. Simple act of kindness changes galactic perspective. Zelthari nominate human for highest honor." She scrolled through more reports. "Species that have never wanted anything to do with humans are now asking questions about us. The Andorian Trade Federation wants to open new shipping routes through human space. The Ethereal Collective is offering to share some of their medical technology. 3 different worlds have requested human teachers to learn about our culture." Jake looked at the tablet with amazement. "All because I helped one little girl?" "Because you showed them what humans are really like," Captain Adams explained. "Most aliens think humans are aggressive and selfish. They see our wars and our history of conflict, and they assume that's all we are. But what you did proves that humans are capable of great kindness and selflessness." Meanwhile, Lyra Shen had become something of a celebrity on her own world. Even though she was still young, the Zelthari Council had named her a junior cultural ambassador. She spent her days giving speeches about her experience with Jake and how it had changed her understanding of other species. "Before I met Jake Morrison, I thought aliens were scary and different," she told a gathering of Zelthari leaders. "But when I was dying in the cold, he did not see an alien child. He saw someone who needed help, and he helped me. This is what true kindness looks like." Her speeches were broadcast across Zelthara and then transmitted to other worlds. Young Zelthari began asking questions about humans and other species. For the first time in their history, many Zelthari started to think that maybe isolation was not the best way to live. The Galactic Council session about Jake's nomination was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Ambassador Threndarak stood before representatives from hundreds of worlds and told the story of the human who had saved his people's child. "In our language, we have a word for the highest form of courage," he said, through the universal translators. "We call it Sharvathul, and it means risking your own life to save a stranger without thought of reward. In our history of 10,000 years, only 37 individuals have ever achieved this honor. Lieutenant Jake Morrison is now the 38th, and he is the first alien ever to join this sacred group." The council chamber erupted in discussion. Some representatives wanted to know more details about what had happened. Others questioned whether humans could really be trusted. But many were impressed by the Zelthari endorsement of a human being. The Krillian ambassador, representing a species that had always been suspicious of humans, stood up to speak. "If the wise Zelthari say this human has shown true honor, then perhaps we have been wrong about humanity. We request permission to send observers to human worlds to learn more about their culture." One by one, other ambassadors began to speak. The Centauri Republic offered to open formal diplomatic relations with Earth. The Hive World suggested cultural exchange programs. Even the mysterious Void Dwellers, who rarely spoke in council sessions, expressed interest in learning more about human compassion. Captain Adams watched the session through video link from Zelthara, amazed at what she was seeing. In one day, Jake's story had opened more diplomatic doors than Earth had managed to open in 50 years of trying. Back on Zelthara, Jake was trying to process what his simple act of kindness had unleashed. He sat with Narration in the Crystal Gardens, watching her practice her English while she taught him words in her musical language. "Do you understand now why what you did was so special?" she asked him in her careful English. Jake thought about it for a moment. "I think I'm starting to understand. But Narration, I want you to know something. Any good human would have done the same thing. What I did wasn't special because I'm some kind of hero. It was just the right thing to do." Narration smiled at him with those beautiful crystal features. "That is exactly why it was so special, Jake Morrison. You did not think about being a hero. You just thought about helping someone who needed help. That is what makes humans so wonderful." As Jake looked around at the crystal city that had become his temporary home, he realized that his life would never be the same. He had crashed on an alien world as a simple exploration pilot, but he would leave as an ambassador for all of humanity, and it had all started with sharing a thermal blanket on a cold night with a frightened child who needed warmth. 6 months after the cold night in the cave, Jake Morrison found himself standing on the largest space station in the galaxy. The Galactic Council's main headquarters was bigger than most cities, with gleaming halls that stretched for miles and observation windows that looked out at the stars from every direction. Today was the day of the cross-species Honor of Merit ceremony, and Jake had never been so nervous in his life. He wore his best Earth Space Force uniform, freshly pressed and decorated with the medals he had earned during his years of service. But those medals seemed small compared to the honor he was about to receive. Representatives from over 200 worlds had come to witness the ceremony. Some had traveled for weeks just to see the human who had changed how the galaxy thought about his species. Jake could see beings of every shape and size filling the great assembly hall. Tall, graceful aliens with flowing robes, small creatures with multiple eyes, even some beings made of pure energy who flickered like living stars. Captain Lisa Adams stood beside Jake as they waited for the ceremony to begin. She had become his guide through the complex world of galactic diplomacy, helping him understand what his simple act of kindness had set in motion. "Are you ready for this?" she asked quietly. Jake adjusted his collar nervously. "I still can't believe this is happening. 6 months ago I was just a pilot doing exploration missions. Now I'm here getting an award that only a few dozen beings in galactic history have ever received." "You earned it," Captain Adams said firmly. "What you did that night changed everything." The ceremony began with Ambassador Threndorak walking to the center of the Great Hall. The ancient Zelthari leader moved with dignity and grace, his crystal skin catching the light from the station's artificial suns. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the translation devices that every being in the hall was wearing. "We gather today to honor Lieutenant Jake Morrison of Earth," he began. "6 months ago, this human being performed an act that our people consider the highest form of heroism. He risked his own life to save a child he had never met, from a species he had never encountered, on a world far from his home." The hall was completely silent as Ambassador Threndorak continued, but the true importance of his actions goes beyond that single night. Lieutenant Morrison showed the galaxy that kindness and compassion are not limited to any one species. He proved that the best qualities of life can be found in any being who chooses to embrace them. Jake watched as the ambassador gestured toward a section of the hall where Narration sat with her family. The young Zelthari had grown taller in the past 6 months, but her eyes still held the same warmth and intelligence that Jake remembered from their first meeting. She was wearing formal robes that marked her as a junior ambassador, a position created specially for her after her speeches about human Zelthari friendship had impressed the Planetary Council. "In our culture," Ambassador Threndorak continued, "we believe that some actions create ripples that spread far beyond their original moment. Lieutenant Morrison's kindness created ripples that have reached every corner of our galaxy." It was true. In the months since Jake's story had spread, dozens of new diplomatic relationships had formed between previously hostile species. Trade agreements had been signed. Cultural exchange programs had been established. 3 separate conflicts between alien worlds had been resolved peacefully, with negotiators pointing to Jake's example as proof that different species could find common ground. The Krillian ambassador stood up to address the hall. His people had been among the most suspicious of humans before Jake's story changed their minds. The Krillian Republic has learned much about humanity in these past months. he said through his translator. "We have discovered that humans like Lieutenant Morrison possess a capacity for selfless love that we had not recognized before. We are honored to call Earth our friends." One by one, other ambassadors stood to speak. The Centauri Republic announced the opening of 3 new research stations where human and Centauri scientists would work together. The Ethereal Collective presented Earth with advanced medical technology that could save millions of human lives. Even the mysterious Void Dwellers offered to share some of their knowledge about deep space navigation. Jake listened to each speech with growing amazement. All of this had started because he couldn't let a child freeze to death. He thought about that night in the cave when he had wrapped his thermal blanket around both himself and Narration. At the time, it had seemed like the only thing a decent person could do. He had never imagined it would lead to all of this. When it was time for Jake to receive his award, he walked to the center of the hall on unsteady legs. The cross-species honor of merit was a beautiful crystal sculpture that seemed to contain actual starlight. Ambassador Threndorak placed it carefully in Jake's hands while cameras from hundreds of worlds recorded the moment. "This honor is not just for you, Lieutenant Morrison," the ambassador said. "It is for all of humanity, and for every being who chooses compassion over fear, kindness over suspicion, and love over hatred." Jake was supposed to give a speech, but when he looked out at the hundreds of alien faces staring at him with respect and gratitude, he almost forgot what he had planned to say. He thought about the scared pilot who had crashed on Zelthara 6 months ago and how different his life had become. "Thank you," he began, his voice echoing through the great hall. "I accept this honor not just for myself, but for every human who has ever helped a stranger in need. What I did that night wasn't special because I'm a hero. It was special because helping others is what good people do, no matter what world they come from or what they look like." He paused and looked toward Narration, who was smiling at him with pride. "I shared my blanket with a cold child because she needed warmth. That's all. But I've learned that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can light up the whole universe." After the ceremony, Jake found himself at a reception where beings from across the galaxy wanted to meet him and thank him for what he had done. But the conversation he treasured most was with Narration, who had grown into a confident young ambassador but still had the same kind heart he remembered. "Jake Morrison," she said in English that had become much better over the months, "I have news to share with you. The Council has approved my application to study at Earth University. I will be the first Zelthari exchange student in your world." Jake's face broke into a huge smile. "That's wonderful, Narration. You'll love Earth, and Earth will love you." She handed him a small crystal that glowed with soft blue light. "This is for you to remember our friendship. It is made from the same crystal as my skin, so it will always be warm, just like the warmth you shared with me that night." As Jake held the crystal, he felt its gentle heat against his palm. It reminded him of that cold night when he had made a choice that changed everything. He looked around at the reception, where humans and aliens were talking and laughing together, building friendships that would last for generations. Captain Adams found him near one of the great windows that looked out at the stars. "So, Lieutenant Morrison, what are your plans now? Earth Command has offered you any position you want. You could be an ambassador, a cultural liaison, anything." Jake thought about it for a moment. "I think I'd like to go back to exploration if that's all right. But maybe this time I can visit some of these new worlds that want to be friends with humanity. I'd like to meet more species and learn about their cultures." "That sounds perfect," Captain Adams said. "The galaxy is a much friendlier place now, thanks to you." As Jake looked out at the stars, he thought about his old thermal blanket, which was now on display in the Zelthari capital, as a symbol of interspecies friendship. Children from dozens of worlds came to see it every day, learning about the human who had shared his warmth with an alien child. The Morrison Protocol, a new cultural exchange program named in his honor, was already bringing together young beings from different species to learn about each other. The program's symbol was a simple blanket, representing the warmth of compassion that could be shared across any divide. Jake realized that his life would never be ordinary again, but he was glad about that. He had learned that the universe was full of different kinds of people, but good hearts were the same everywhere. And sometimes all it took to change the world was sharing your blanket with someone who was cold. Looking out at the infinite stars, Jake Morrison smiled. Somewhere out there were countless worlds full of beings he had never met, species he had never imagined, and children who might someday need the warmth of a friend. He was ready to explore them all, one act of kindness at a time.